hey, this is what that bed box looks like in chapter 3. So when we look structurally at the novel, Bronte playing with two genres and mixing them together, and we need to see the presence of both. One, the book is heavily influenced by the Gothic movement. If you look at this picture of an English manor house, Gothic architecture arranges itself around vertical lines. Have you ever seen Notre Dame, the cathedral in France? Or you've seen churches in that style, lots of spires, lots of tall vertical windows. So Gothic architecture was very popular in like 15th century Europe. But by the 1800s, the 19th century, we get these houses built in that style that are all falling apart and more or less playing the role for children of the creepy house on the hill. Well, authors use that to their advantage. Some of the major Gothic pieces that we see come out of Europe in that 19th century movement include Dracula, Frankenstein. The work of Victor Hugo even falls into it. And of course, once that movement starts in Europe, it eventually comes to America, and we see authors like Edgar Allan Poe that pick up that Gothic style. Gothic literature is known for a couple of basic things. It presents an atmosphere of mystery and suspense. The emotions in Gothic works are highly charged and overwrought. You see it in these chapters. Characters are not just happy or sad. They're exuberant or utterly depressed. Imagine taking all of your emotions to 11. There is a presence of the supernatural. Now, don't confuse that to think it has to be something like a ghost or a monster. Supernatural is just more than normal. And so, what is the best example in these first bunch of chapters of the presence of the supernatural in the book? Yeah, Catherine's ghost that's presented. Now, we don't know that it's really a ghost that's seen because it's a dream. But at the same time, it's her bringing that idea in because we see Heathcliff's reaction. We do have a very big part of death and decay that plays in. Again, look at the house. Nothing in Gothic literature is new and pristine. Everything's falling apart. Not just the buildings, but you'll notice that the people and the relationships, the families and the societies are all shown to be less than nice. If you look back at the first 2 pages of the novel, as Lockwood walks up to Wuthering Heights, go back and reread and look at how he describes the house, how there's grass growing up through the flagstones, how the only plants that are growing seem to be these brambly, really thorny, tough plants, not flowers, not the stuff that we want to see. He talks about the inside of the house even looking more like a farmhouse than an estate house. There's big hunks of meat sitting around and stuff like that. This place is not what it should be. And it's why we start at the end. That way we can go back in time and show how do we devolve to this point. Characters are often isolated. We will see that continue as the novel goes on. We've introduced it slightly by the end. Catherine being taken over to Thrushcross Grange, Nellie going with her. And as we see characters move between houses, we will see more specifically the changes that occur, as well as the fact that when characters move, they are completely out of their element. And it becomes really clear. We do get that impression in this section. Where do we see a movement of a character from one house to another and a major change that happens? Catherine. How does she return to Wuthering Heights after that incident with the dog bite?
Proper.
Huh?
Proper?
Proper. What does that mean?
Well, I was just quoting Miss Linton. She said she wanted to make Catherine proper.
Yeah. So, like, think about how she comes back dressed, even. She's wearing a dress. She's done up to be pretty. She wants to have tea with her friends, the Lintons. Totally different Catherine than we saw even the previous chapter, who's running around the moors with Heathcliff, all caked up in the mud in the dark. And so we take a character out of their place, we put them at the other, we see the change that happens. That's going to be more pronounced as they are adults and the book continues. Other issues, psychological problems. We're not quite there yet, but we will be. A dark and gloomy tone, a creepy setting, and twisted love. And when we say twisted love, it is not a nice, clean sense of love that is presented in these books. Things don't work right. And we're seeing that between Catherine and Heathcliff. Obviously, it is the classic thing of like people being like, oh, but I so want them to love each other. These two characters are terrible for each other. All these people in this book are despicable, terrible people. You're not supposed to like any of them. So it's always so surprising to me when people are like, oh, but they're like two lovers. Oh, it's maybe at some point, but it's like, would you want that relationship? Where you overhear somebody being like, you know what, I'm going to marry this other guy because I really think I can help him by marrying somebody else. Oh. The book also brings in a second piece, which is romanticism. There's a short video. I put this into today's Canvas page. So you can go back and watch the video pieces. What we should know about romanticism is that we romanticize nature more than this concept of two characters like hugging and being all about each other with their shirts open. No, it's a romanticism of nature. And especially when we look at the way that the moors are written about in this book, the landscape of the setting, it is Bronte trying to capture what that northern English countryside looks like. And she uses the tough terrain to kind of show these tough characters. If we need kind of okay, where are we? Most of us know London. Like, most of the time when you're talking about British literature and you have that, you're thinking, okay, we're probably set here. Instead, we're set here, up in the Yorkshires. So not quite Scotland. And if we zoom in, here is where we are. Not quite the coast either. And what this northern Yorkshire area is known for is the kind of scrub-like terrain. We live in prairie land here. So we're used to some of the things that they see there. The one thing that they have that we don't is the dirt. When we talk about a moor and the landscape, I need you to think of dirt that's like a sponge. So when you walk in a field, we're used to like that hard clay dirt. So when you're walking in a field, it's like there's no give. I want you to think the opposite. It's more like a swamp in some ways. Every step you take squishes. And the dirt holds the moisture. And so what you get a lot of times on the moors is the fog and kind of the damp, cold temperatures. To help with just the visualizing of like, what's it look like? I do have a short video here that kind of takes us into that Yorkshire area. And I'm going to play this one just so that you have it for the visual piece. Perhaps.
The landscape is so important for them. They live in this house. And one way it looks down onto this working everyday town, and then back to this absolutely unique landscape. And it's a landscape that is pretty harsh. It's not one that easily takes on human life. It's not one that is pastoral or ideal in a way. It's harsh and it's brutal. And it so structures the book. It's a world of contrasts, right, between the height at the top and Thrushcross Grange below. Very different places, very different societies, living in part of very different landscapes. But it's also that it matters for the characters too, that Heathcliff is compared to the landscape. Like a windstone. It's like something harsh and stony, something which anything can grow. So part of his destructiveness is related to the destructiveness or the coldness or the difficulty of the landscape.
Okay. Just to give you that visual impression, what's this look like? What's it got? I think that helps us to sort of put it together, and we'll talk a little bit about the landscape in a moment. Come on, go. There we go. So I did put a second video too. There's some woman who like little travelogue of like, look, I love her. I went. Yeah, good for you. One thing that does influence the book is the creation of this 19th century ideal of a male. Heathcliff is an example of what we call a Byronic hero, not ironic, Byronic. It's influenced by the poet Lord Byron. He was a friend of the Shelleys. So if you've ever heard the anecdotal story about how Frankenstein was written, you know, Mary Shelley, her husband, who's also a writer, and their very close friend, Lord Byron, are all on a weekend trip together. It's raining, it's cold, and they decide to have a contest to see who can write the best story. And of course, what Shelley begins writing there ends up becoming the novel Frankenstein. Byron was a part of that circle. And in his writing, he creates this male figure that we see repeated in certain English pieces as time goes on, and it sort of disappears. But if you're looking at this list, you should start to go, oh, wow, that really is Heathcliff. There is a conflict of emotions and moodiness in these men. There's a self-critical element to them. They come from mysterious origins and deal with troubled pasts. They have a distaste for the social institutions and norms that guide English society at the time. They have self-destructive tendencies. They are loners who are rejected by society, and you're going, oh my God, yeah, that's totally him. We want to know that he follows into that trope, but by defining these things out, we're able to say, this is how this guy ticks. These are the things that are going to help him to make the choices he does from a construction end. The author is intending to lean into this. It wasn't like she was like, oh, well, I guess it just fits. There's an intention there. Nope, don't want that. I did make a list that you can use as we go onwards with the book of like, hey, what are some major themes that the next section is really going to touch on? This can help you out to prepare for next week. But I do want to take some time to answer questions about the quiz today and the reading section if there are things we just don't know. Would it be helpful if I put the quiz questions up as a reference? Or do you have specific questions you want to bring up? All right, let's talk about a couple of things then. Maybe that's helpful since everybody's just staring at me like you don't know what to do. Let's talk about some basic understandings that you should come away from these early chapters being able to talk about. We have two houses, we have two families, but they are starkly different in a lot of ways. Where is Wuthering Heights?
Is it northern? Northern?
Don't worry about directionally.
Oh.
Think about if you had to describe its location. What defines where Wuthering Heights is located?
In that landscape that we saw, and it's very much isolated.
Yes, an isolated where? Because he mentioned it in the video too. It's on a hill. So in the first couple of pages, as they describe for you Wuthering, they mention the fact that it is exposed to the winds. It's exposed to the weather. It shows its age on the exterior of the house. This is different than Thrushcross Grange. A grange is a working farm. Thrushcross Grange is in a valley. And so we have two houses that are literally in different features. One is exposed and beaten by the weather. The other is seemingly protected. Does that match the people that grow up there? Can you explain?
So at Wuthering Heights, they're very much more broken. They lost their father young. And when Heathcliff was taken in, there was this form of like jealousy. So there's a lot of infighting between the people
Yes.
that live there. Whereas Dutch Cross Grange, they're very much sheltered kids. They're rich. They have lots of money. They're very pro.
Yes. Think about the scene where, we kind of alluded to it in chapter 6, where Heathcliff and Catherine are looking into the windows as Edgar and Isabella are inside of Thrushcross Grange. And we get this interesting inside and outside thing. We have a boy and a girl in each setting that, even though Heathcliff and Catherine are not siblings, they might as well be. But notice how they are outside in the dirt, very tomboyish. They come from that harsher thing, and they're looking in at these two privileged, rich children doing what? Oh, there was a dog. They were literally pulling at the dog for who it belonged to. Like, imagine that you and your sibling are like wrestling over a stuffed animal and you're pulling it. This is a dog that they're doing it to. And arguing there. And so we have these two outside that are united always, and these two inside that can't even, they're pulling a living thing between them. And so we show this difference between the two families in a lot of these ways, and the houses will mirror that difference. If you haven't noticed it already, I'm going to key you in. The key place that they will come back to time and again in Wuthering Heights is the kitchen. The key place that they will mention time and again in Thrushcross Grange is the library. Think about how that shows a level of privilege and a level of social class. This book is a book of social class. It is very different than how we exist now. Do we have social classes in this country? Sure. But it is nothing like it is in England at the time. And the character that most strictly shows this is our friend Heathcliff. How does Heathcliff get his name? They didn't, so they don't give him the Earnshaw last name. He is not fully adopted. But where do they get this name from? They mention when they bring him back that they had a dead child, and the child had been named Heathcliff. And so this orphan is being given someone else's name to carry forth. Heathcliff is described as absolutely different than the rest of them. He is olive-skinned. He is dark-haired. He is meant to be a gypsy compared to these fair-skinned children of the northern part of England. When he is brought in, we see the immediate reaction from these kids. They're expecting gifts, a whip, an instrument, and instead they get this orphan boy. How does Mr. Earnshaw describe him when he shows up?
He was like babbling and all alone.
Mm-hmm.
He described it not as like a human being, but as like a dog. He kept referring to Heathcliff as it, and like its owner.
He also calls him a gift from God. That's going to come back to bite this whole situation completely in the butt, because Heathcliff is anything but that. And we see the problems that persist. We begin at the end, and it raises a question. How does the orphan boy, in a society that is so strict about land ownership and social class, end up owning not just Wuthering Heights, but also Thrushcross Grange? And this is where we are going to grind out this story as we move through. How does this happen for this reversal that is impossible in the society that is producing this piece of literature? We have started to lay some of the seeds. We have introduced death into these families. And of course, I always like to talk about, how do the Linton parents die?
Okay.
Because Catherine comes over, and why does she come over? Why is she sick? you're starting to see that Heathcliff infects this family. The only reason why the Lintons die is because of Heathcliff. And as we go on, we're going to see his effect worm its way in. One last thing to kind of bring up. Catherine relates at one point a dream to Nellie Dean that she had. This is when she's talking about Heathcliff and how she loves him, but I can't be with him. Did that dream stick out to you at all? She says she has a dream that she dies and goes to heaven, and she's not happy there. And so the angels bring her back to Wuthering Heights. Hey, really quick question. If you die and you go to heaven, what's the other alternative? Hell. And so from this early chapter, we already have the influence from the author to describe that Wuthering Heights is a hellish place, and it will only get worse in the next section. All of the female influence has been taken away from this place. Remember, right now there are four people living there. Heathcliff, Henley, Hareton, and of course Joseph. And so when we do introduce a female into the house, it will be described as a nightmare. Be ready for it. We will continue next week